Hello guys, and welcome to the video. So today I actually have something very different from what you normally see from me. And yeah, this is honestly something I've never done before. We are actually going to try a hybrid PvE DPS build. And I guess that's just all I'm going to say about it. This is going to be a weird spec, for sure. Now, some things that I really want to say before we jump into this video. Number one, I am fully aware that a hybrid DPS is not going to be as competitive as a pure Magicka or Stamina DPS, and they will never be. Just the way that the math works in ESO, you will never have a hybrid that is going to pull as much DPS as a pure Magicka or Stamina build. That being said, a very well-built hybrid, I think, should be able to pull within around 20 to 15% less DPS than what these pure builds are pulling. So anyway, this is my hybrid DPS build that I have put together for the Summerset patch. This is not a complete build, and there's a good reason for that. I am not a PvE build crafter. I am not a PvE player doing rotations, etc. This is also foreign to me. I don't play this normally. I'm normally a PvP player, so I don't have a lot of expertise in these fields. That being said, well, no one's really tackled PvE hybrids. I mean, there's like no build videos for it. There's like no footage out there of a PvE hybrid pulling DPS or whatever. So I thought that maybe we'd try on the PTS to do it, see what we could pull, and then just kind of crowdsource back to you guys. See what you think about what I've put together here. What could I do to improve it? What could I change maybe to get better DPS? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. But without further ado, let's jump into the build and check out this PvE hybrid spec. So to start off, we've got the very low Magicka stamina, very indicative of a hybrid to have low max Magicka stamina. We've got pretty great recoveries, 1500 Magicka and 1650 stamina recovery. Now this is actually more recovery than you really need for this build. I think that using a food such as the Candy Jester's coins, which is going to give you the Magicka recovery as well as max stam, is maybe the better option. And if you find on this build that you can get the rotation down so perfect that you don't run out of resources, go for the max stamina and the max Magicka food just to bulk your DPS on it further. So that's just something I wanted to talk about, the recoveries there. This is a lot higher than it needs to be for a PvE DPS build. Taking a look at our weapon spell damage, unbuffed, we're looking at 3.2k weapon spell damage, coming up to 3,800 buffed weapon and spell damage. This looks really low, and that's how it's going to look. I mean, a big part of why these values are lower looking is because we're on a hybrid build, and we don't have access to being able to stack both of these as high as a pure Magicka or Stam build would be able if they were just focusing on one. That being said, though, when we buff up with our infused enchant as well, you can see that we actually come up to 4,400 weapon spell damage on the front bar here, fully buffed. So the weapon spell damage is a lot less impressive than the PvP specs that you see, and there's a good reason for that, and it's mostly because in PvE, going for flat weapon spell damage is usually not the best bet into giving you good outgoing DPS. Our weapon and spell critical are pretty awesome. We're looking at buffed 40% spell crit, and buffed we have 43% weapon crit. So just about the 40% line on both of them. So great amounts of crit on this build, which is super awesome. That's what we want to see. Our physical and spell resist is coming in at 1600 or around 1500 for both. This again is not a big deal for the hybrid. We're not focusing on this. This is a DPS build, so this I guess is fine because we're in medium armor. No crit resist. This is a PvE build. No crit resist on it. This is the one build that I will post where we will have 0 crit resist. For the buffs we're running, we have got the Lover boon. I think the Lover is the best bet for outgoing damage on a solo Parse. Penetration is going to give you the biggest benefit to your outgoing damage. That being said, though, guys, if you guys disagree with me here and you think another Mundus would provide this build with better outgoing damage, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And then we have Minor Slayer, and this is going to give us 5% additional damage to dungeon and trial monsters, as well as the DPS dummy that we're testing. He takes the Minor Slayer buff as well. And that's through our sets that we get this buff here. Alright, so a peek at the gear that we're using. For the helm set, I went with the 2-piece Zon. Now, I had tested a few different helm sets, and the best performing were Zon and Veladrith. I decided to go for Zon because it is the best single-target DPS. That being said, I think in a dungeon, Veladrith, if it shoots the 3 spores, would actually maybe out-DPS Zon. But against the target dummy only eats 1 Veldrith Spore. So for the target dummy, I think that Zon is going to be the better DPS tester. But if you're fighting a very large boss, I think Veldrith is going to be more beneficial to your DPS. Veldrith, of course, takes the one-piece weapon damage, which gets copied over from our Pelinals as well. So that's kind of the advantage of that there. The next set that we have is Pelinals. This is the base of a hybrid build. This is to turn our weapon damage into spell damage. So yeah, that's pretty much why we got this set here. We get both stamina and magicka recovery from it, which is nice because that sustain will help us keep up our damage. Max health on the two-piece, I mean, not super fantastic. This build doesn't have a crazy amount of HP. I mean, we're sitting at just around 16k HP, which is fairly low for a dungeon. That being said, though, you know, HP is not the focus because we're on a hybrid. We're really just trying to push out as much damage as possible, and everything else is secondary to that. The next set that we are wearing is War Machine, and now we have War Machine on our front dual-wield bar. War Machine is a fantastic set, I think, for the hybrid DPS because you get Minor Slayer as well as Major Slayer from it. And both of these buffs will affect all your outgoing damage. Magicka, stamina, doesn't matter, including your proc sets like Zon and your poisons as well. So this is actually, I think, one of the best in slot sets that we could run on this hybrid build. I had thought of trying Mechanical Acuity here as well. I did not like how Acuity was working. I didn't seem to be able to get very good parses on it. So I think War Machine is the way to go for this spec. That being said, what do you guys think? Is there maybe a better set that you'd want to run in pair with Pelinals, or maybe even trade Pelinals out? I don't even know anymore. I mean, we've done so many hybrids, and as I continue to build them, the lines between what you can and can't do on a hybrid just become less and less finite. So there you go. We have gone with War Machine, and I think that for this build it is really good. We are using the Incapacitating Strike Ultimate, so War Machine paired with the Incap Strike, it means that we're going to have a really good uptime on Major Slayer on this spec as well, and that's what we want for that outgoing damage too. For the last set that we have a Maelstrom's Lightning Staff on our back bar, and I've actually gone with Charged on this one to increase the chance to apply the status effect, be it off balance or minor vulnerability. So the reason we went with this weapon, of course, is because it allows your light and heavy attacks to deal 1,341 extra damage to anyone in your wall of elements, and this will carry over to your dual wield bar when you weapon swap as well, so it'll allow all your light attacks to deal a lot more damage. And when you do DPS, light attacks actually make up the largest portion of your DPS for most DPS builds. They do for this one, so the light attack increase is a really nice bonus. And then on top of it, this bonus is a flat increase to the tooltip damage, so this bonus does count towards critical damage as well. For the trait, as I had mentioned, we've gone with Charged, and that's just to afflict more off balance and more minor vulnerability while we're on our staff bar. And then we have the poisons as well on the staff bar. And the reasons I put it on the back staff bar here is because of, well, we just didn't have room for it on the front bar with the infused Nirnhoned combo that we had on the front bar. For the front bar, I have gone with Nirnhoned on the main sword, and then on the back sword, I have gone with Infused. I picked dual swords, thinking this will be the best DPS. Now, I actually don't know if going for an axe here would be better or not, because you would get the bleed. That being said, we don't have a ton of attacks that have a chance to proc that bleed, so that's why I went for the dual swords. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this point here too. So Nirnhoned on the front sword and Infused on the back sword. The front one, of course, is Nirnhoned because it will determine the majority of our weapon damage value. So Nirnhoning this bad boy will give us the highest weapon damage that we can. And then the back sword is, of course, Infused, and that's to buff up our weapon spell damage value on this sword as well. And finally, running the Infused on this back sword will give the cooldown on our Nirnhoned sword for the poison enchant. It'll lower that cooldown by 50%. So we effectively get to really double dip with the Nirnhoned and Infused on our dual wield bar, which I think is ideally what we want to do, especially on the hybrid, to up that outgoing damage. And no poisons on this bar, so we can access our enchants for it. For the jewelry, I have gone with full infused jewelry and the weapon damage enchants. Very important that you do this because the weapon damage will be translated over into spell damage because of the Pelinals build, so you must have infused weapon damage jewelry. For the traits on the gear, I've gone with full divines because we are running the sharpened Mundus. So full divines is just going to give us more and more outgoing damage from that Mundus stone. Any other traits you pick here are not going to benefit your damage or your sustain enough to be worthwhile. Full Divines is the way to go. For the enchants on the gear, you want to go for the Tri-Stat Hacky Joe Glyphs. This is going to give you both Magicka and Stamina, and of course make up for the lack of health that this build has. Now, if you're very poor and you want to try something like this out, and you don't want to spend the money on the Hacky Joes, you can definitely just go with a Magicka or Stamina Glyph here to replace it at the cost of course, that HP, so you'll have the same damage but less max hit points. Alright, so let's take a peek at the abilities that we're using for the build as well. So we're actually going to start on the Destro bar to begin with. The first skill we have is Blockade of Storms. This is going to be important because it will set concussed enemies off balance. And it's also a lightning ability, so you have a chance of applying minor vulnerability with it. On top of it, this is one of your best damage over time AoEs that you have, DPS-wise. And finally, this plays into the Maelstrom staff by buffing the light attacks that we deal when we use this ability on both our staff and our dual-wield bar. So keeping this one down, I think, is the most important dot to make sure that you never let expire. If you have 100% uptime on Blockade of Storms, that is very good, and that's the one you want to make sure you have the most uptime on. The next ability that we have is Twisting Path. This is, again, an AoE dot that deals just great damage over time, and it's a ground-based attack, and that's why we have it here. And then Caltrops to go with it, the next and final AoE ground-based dot that we have to pair with it. And as you can see, the tooltips on here are all pretty decent, coming in at around 1500 every 1 second for each of these when I'm unbuffed. So not bad at all, and of course if we fully buff up, they will get a lot better. Coming up to 1800 on the Storm here, so quite a lot of damage on these abilities, just damage over time wise. The next skill that we have is Elemental Drain. Now, I had tried out, instead of using Elemental Drain, I had gone for the Piercing Mark, because Piercing Mark debuffs both physical and spell resistance. This build needs the stamina or the Magicka recovery from Elemental Drain. I think you can get away with using Piercing Mark if you have the rotation perfect and do not overcast anything at all. Otherwise, Ele Drain is going to be much better because it's going to give you the Magicka steal, giving not only you better sustain, but your whole group better sustain. And honestly, I think having the sustain to make sure you can continue to use skills is better than trying to go for the max damage spec right away, and then you learn the rotation and then try to perfect it to get up in those higher 30k DPS parses. And then finally we have Inner Light. This is for the spell crit buff as well as a little bit of max Magicka. It's just a passive skill that we have here to bulk up our build a little bit. For the ultimate, we have Thunderous Rage on the Destro bar. This is going to be your AoE ult of choice or your beginning ultimate if you're entering a boss burn. During the phase of your DPS, you don't want to use your Thunderous Rage. Normally, it'll only be your opening ultimate. During the normal DPS parse, you're going to be using Incapacitating Strike, so you get that War Machine buff that you want from it. Okay, so let's take a look at that dual wield bar. So just like the back bar that we had, the dual wield bar is incredibly dot heavy because honestly, when it came to the hybrid, I found ability-wise, going for a damage over time focus spec was the way to go. I had tried various things. I know I had gone for the Elemental Drain on the back bar here. I had tried switching out the surprise attack so we had the full debuff coverage as well as a spammable off surprise attack, and it is pretty cheap, so it's a good option for the spammable. However, I got the best consistent DPS parses when I went full dots and had absolutely no spammables on this build. Regarding a hybrid damage build, I mean, that's the only advantage I can really think of that a hybrid would have over other classes is more access to these damage over time abilities, allowing them to potentially have a better dot gameplay than the pure build. But as you can see, I mean, the hybrid is still behind the pure build, but the dot build provided me the best DPS that I could find, so I did want to mention that for you guys. So taking a look at the first ability here, we have Crippling Grasp, and Crippling Grasp is going to be fantastic just for that damage over time that it deals and a little bit of upfront damage as well. This is one of the stronger single target dots that this build has. Something I did want to note though is that all of these AoE dots deal more damage over time than any of the single target dots do. So that's just a little fun fact, is that the single target dots are actually your weakest dots on this build, but don't neglect them. You still want to use them though, because like I said, the dot spam is really what is going to unlock you achieving the higher DPS on the hybrid, I think. Go ahead though and prove me wrong though, guys. Go for full spammables and pull 30k. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. That's why I'm posting this build, because I don't know myself. The rearming trap is the next skill that we have. Now, rearming trap is good because it rearms itself, so you get the 12-second duration instead of 6 seconds on it. That being said, you could go for the other morph here. Because we have nothing but dots that you'll be cycling, you can potentially go for the other morph here and continue to cycle it, and it shouldn't break the rotation. In fact, I think in the end you'll get better DPS going for the other morph, but this one's just easier to manage when you're trying to learn to cycle all your dots early on. So yeah, in the DPS parse that I showed for you guys, I was using rearming trap. I feel like I could have got a little bit better DPS had I gone for the lightweight beast trap. A little fun fact about the lightweight beast trap too is it actually has a bit better tooltip than the rearming trap does. The upfront physical damage as well as the dot are a little bit stronger on the lightweight beast trap. So that's something I did want to note about this skill as well. And then finally, this skill is very important, I think. You don't want to drop this dot because it gives you minor force, increasing your crit damage by 10%. That's going to be a nice DPS increase. That's like a 4% outgoing damage increase because we have around 40% crit. So there you go. The next skill that we have is Rending Slashes. Rending Slashes is the weakest single target damage over time ability that we have on this build. If you want to switch out any skill for a spammable, this is the one that you want to switch it out for, or for a different dot, or whatever other abilities that you want to try. This is the weakest one. Now, it still performed better than the spammables when I did my testing. That being said, I am a PvE noob. I do not have good rotations. They are not well done, and I'm very confident I could pull 2 to 3k more DPS if my rotation wasn't so bad alone. So there's that to keep in mind. But I did find Rending Slashes to be better damage than any spammable that we had used. The next ability that I have is Relentless Focus. Now, Relentless Focus I chose over Merciless Resolve for a couple reasons. So, Relentless Focus versus Merciless Resolve. Merciless Resolve is going to have a slightly better tooltip damage, 1 or 2% more damage off Merciless. However, Relentless Focus is going to give you that minor stamina recovery. Now, both of them are awesome for minor Berserk. I mean, that's the buff we want, 8% more damage across the board. Great, but this is your pretty much spammable attack. Every 5 light attacks that you do, you get to shoot the bow. And when you shoot the bow, it deals a ton of upfront damage. Now, this bow, ideally, you want to time, because we are running the War Maiden, you want to time it after your ultimate, because you will get a 20% damage bonus on it if you fire it after the ultimate. So it is worth it to wait on this ability, unless you don't have the ultimate up anytime soon, then just fire it right away. But this is going to actually be like a huge amount of damage coming out of the Nightblade from the Relentless Focus or the Merciless Resolve. Which morph you want to pick is kind of up to you. I went with Relentless just due to sustain issues that I was having in a kind of older iteration of this spec, and I didn't end up changing it. I think you could go with either morph that you want here. The Magicka one is a little bit more damage, like I said, but you will have more sustain issues if you go for the Magicka morph, so that is something I wanted to mention. Relentless not only is cheaper, but it also gives you the stamina recovery bonus. So there you go. Both are very good options, though. I didn't think I did enough testing, though, to really determine which one is superior. So this is, again, something that I think I would love to ask your guys' opinion on, too. And then finally, we have Inner Light. Same reason it was on the back bar for that Magicka bonus and that spell crit buff. And then for the ultimate, we have Incapacitating Strike. You can go with either morph here, Incap or Soul Harvest. Soul Harvest is going to be really nice because you'll generate more ultimate if you're fighting mobs and you have Soul Harvest out. But if you have Incap out and you're doing a solo boss parse, the Soul Harvest ultimate generation is usually negligible. So Incap, I think, is the better bet simply because we have a higher crit chance with our weapon crit than we do with the spell crit by just around 5%. Or not even 4%. So not a huge amount of crit discrepancy, but just due to the fact that we have a little bit more weapon crit, I feel like Incap is the better bet for this build. Now, Incap, of course, is awesome because it will activate our War Machine set as well, and then on top of it, it will increase the damage we deal against our opponent by 20% for 6 seconds after the Incap anyway. So plus the War Machine buff, we get a huge outgoing bonus to our damage, a 35% bonus to our outgoing damage when we use our ultimate on an opponent, and that lasts for 6 to 10 seconds, and yeah, it's going to not only affect the outgoing Merciless or Relentless Focus that we shoot, but all of our damage over time will be increased for this period as well. So that is a big part of this build, is making sure that we keep that Incap coming down as often as possible to keep that War Machine buff up as often as possible. Alright guys, we're going to take a peek at the champion points, but yet again, this is not my field of expertise, so none of these are going to be as good as I think you're going to want them. For the green tree, just ignore what I have here. I just went full Mooncalf, full Arcanist, so I have the best sustain possible while I was testing this build. Obviously, that's not what you're going to do. You do want to focus Mooncalf Arcanist for your sustain, and pretty much put points nowhere else. Tenacity, you don't want to put any points in Tenacity for this build because you don't have to heavy. If you do the rotations right, you'll never have to do a heavy attack, so you don't want to put points in here. And these other trees are just useless. You don't need them for PvE. Don't worry about them. All you need is the sustain. Looking at the blue tree, this is really the tree that you guys want to see for the hybrid, and I've built it a little differently. I mean, I think this is the best approach that I have right now to it. That being said, though, I didn't do a lot of testing with the CP, and like I said, this is not a complete build. I just wanted to show you guys what I was working on because I don't have all the information I need to, I think, do this perfectly. So this is what I've kind of come up with on the hybrid here. I have a fairly even spread with 51 Master at Arms, 19 Physical, and 9 Staff Expert. So not a lot in the Atronach tree here, not a lot in our Apprentice tree with 32 Elemental and 23 Spell Erosion, and most of the focus over in our Ritual tree. So something I did want to mention, though, is that we do have a even focus. If you can see on our Ritual tree, we got 32 Mighty, 23 Piercing, and we reflect that with 32 Elemental and 23 Spell Erosion. So our Magicka and Stamina are both getting the same amount of attack bonus from our champion points here. So the Master at Arms was chosen because of our light attacks as well as our Merciless Resolve and our ultimate. A lot of outgoing damage is going to come from those abilities. So Master at Arms, I dumped a lot of points in for that reason. And then we put a lot of points into Physical and a little bit less into Staff Expert. And this is because you will spend more time light attacking on your front bar than you will on your back bar. So your Physical one is going to be a little bit more important in determining your DPS. And then checking out the Ritual tree, the only thing we didn't talk about is Thaumaturge. Thaumaturge, we've got 61 points here to increase the damage over time effects that we have. We have tons of dots. This is a mix between a burst / dot damage build, and that's kind of how Nightblade functions in PvE anyways. You want to have that focus on, of course, your single target as well as your damage over time. And this is going to buff up all the dots that we have big time. We have tons of dot damage. The other half of our damage is coming from dots, so that's why we have a nice big fat amount of points in here. The important passives that you want for a hybrid is going to be 30 points for the Perfect Strike here, and then 30 points in this tree for Spell Precision. That's going to give you both the weapon and spell crit buffs that you need to really give you the bonus damage that you want on the hybrid. And then taking a look at the red tree, seriously, this tree doesn't matter. Put it wherever you want, guys. I mean, we're looking at a hybrid DPS build. Ideally, you want to put points in so you don't get one shot by the boss. So a nice even stat spread, as you can see here, with absolutely nothing in crit resist because you don't have to worry about that in PvE land. But, you know, this tree, like I said, is not important for a DPS build. You can just look up any medium armor PvE tree and you'll know what to run here. So there you go, guys. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So I do have a parse for you guys of this build, and we do pull 30k on it. So you will see the hybrid parse here in its entirety. We start a little bit low HP on the test dummy. He starts around 2 mil, and I apologize for that. It's just because I was testing, and I was just testing how much damage different things did. And then I was like, okay, let's do another parse. And well, he just happened to have lower HP. But anyway, as you can see, when we open with the Destro ult, it's not like it gives us a huge buff to our DPS. If anything, it just allows us to go into our dot rotation and maintain that around 30k DPS that this build has. Now, something that I did want to mention is that I am a noob, and I cannot stress that enough when it comes to PvE and parses, is that I'm not experienced. A big part of my parse here, you can see that I have like buffs that are not going down. I have damage over time abilities that I'm not refreshing in time. You know, I'm not using my bow in the right order. I'm using my Incap after my bow shot, etc. So I think that I really just wanted to note how many mistakes I made in this parse and still was able to pull 30k on it. So this is what I was talking about when I said that I think that a hybrid build could potentially pull 35 plus k if we had someone who was more experienced doing the parses here. Alright guys, so that is the end of the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching it. If you guys did, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. And we play live on Twitch, so if you guys want to come see me when I'm playing live on Twitch, I don't normally do PvE like this. This was just something that I wanted to dabble in because, well, no one else has really done hybrid PvE builds, so I wanted to show you guys what I've been working on with it. But I do lots of PvP stuff, lots of build craft, lots of theory craft, lots of just dicking around on ESO, so if you guys want to come watch the stream, you can feel free to come and join. Link, of course, is in the description below. And then finally, we are sponsored by What the Fast. They are a VPN for gamers, so if you guys get crap pinged to your favorite game and you want to alleviate that, maybe a VPN is for you. Also, free to try from the description in the link below. Have a great night, guys, and thank you so much for tuning in today.